Hey everybody, so things truly just keep getting nuttier and nuttier. I almost don't even know where to begin, but got to begin somewhere, and I guess I'll just say that it truly feels like we're hurtling down a wormhole of nightmarish insanity, and that's just never going to end. You know that song? This is the song that never ends. It just goes on, my friends. That's what's going on with this whole Trump, Russia, Mueller, Bill Barr, the whole saga. It just never ends. So when people thought that when the Mueller report was issued on April 18th, that would somehow stem the hysteria around this issue, I said to them, you're wrong. It's going to continue. It's just going to take on a new form. And sure enough, that's what happened, because remember, people were just too emotionally invested in it, too politically invested in it, too professionally invested in it to give it up. It's not going away. And today's big development was that the House Judiciary Committee voted to find Bill Barr in contempt. And they did that on grounds that seem rather spurious. And I want to just explain to you why. And I'm going to read some primary documentation here. And I really encourage people to seek out primary documents, because you don't want to rely on secondhand characterizations from... Jeez. Oh, sorry. I thought my thing was on mute there. Never mind. Amateur hour, remember. So you don't want to just rely on secondhand characterizations in the media of any of these materials, because often they have a spin that's deceptive or wrong or stupid. So just look, get the letters. They're all available on the internet. They're all posted on government websites, so they're not hard to find. So here's a letter from the Assistant Attorney General. His name is Stephen Boyd, to Gerald Nadler on May 1st. Okay? And this was in response to this subpoena that Gerald Nadler issued as chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House to the Department of Justice for materials relating to the Mueller Report. And here's what Boyd says in the letter. Okay? Here's how he characterizes what Gerald Nadler requested or subpoenaed. Nadler, according to Boyd, quote, demanded all of the special counsel's investigative files, which consist of millions of pages of classified and unclassified documents bearing upon more than 24 criminal cases and investigations, many of which are ongoing. Boyd goes on, you served such a subpoena knowing that the department could not lawfully provide the unredacted report. And he says that processing your requests would impose a significant burden on the department. So remember how sprawling and even unwieldy, you might say, the Mueller investigation was. So 22 months, and dating back even longer if you want to predate it to the initial FBI investigation, and we still don't really have a firm timeline on when that exactly began. They claim July 31st, 2016, but there's reason to believe that it actually began well before that. So who knows whether documents from that time period might have also been pertinent under the terms of the subpoena issued by Nadler. Which is all just to say, these are millions and millions of documents, which have all kinds of legal restrictions as to whether they can be promulgated, whether it's because they have grand jury materials. I mean, that's the most obvious restriction, which is that it's actually against the law if it would violate a federal statute for the Department of Justice to issue to Congress materials that relate to grand jury investigations. So, but nonetheless, Nadler issued, in the subpoena he issued, Nadler, the day after the Mueller report was finally released on April 18th, Nadler demanded the entire report. Now, he said later on that he'd be willing to work on some accommodation with the Department of Justice to exclude some of the most sensitive materials. But if that's the case, why did you automatically right away, without even bothering to sit down and read the report through yet, send this extremely broad subpoena? And I think Boyd is correct when he says it was all just pretextual. Nadler had no expectation, or no reasonable expectation anyway, that the subpoena he issued could have been complied with in the short time span that Nadler specified. It's just not practically feasible. Even if the Department of Justice wasn't bound by these legal restrictions, the idea that they could have produced this in the time frame demanded is just incredibly far-fetched to the point of absurdity. So then you have to ask yourself, why did Matt Nadler issue the subpoena? I'll tell you why. This is my theory, but I think it's a well-founded theory. Nadler, in relationship with the rest of the House Democratic leadership, so this is Nadler is a high-ranking, powerful official in the House, so he is in regular communication with Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, James Clyburn, Hakeem Jeffries, and others who are high up in the power structure in the Democratic Party in the House. They had a concerted strategy, which is they want to make some moves that keep the possibility of impeachment on the table, but don't fully endorse impeachment yet. Rather, they endorse the preliminary steps which would then eventuate in impeachment. So by going down this Bill Barr wormhole, that kind of converts the House under the Democratic leadership into this posture of open warfare, more or less, with the executive branch. And, warfare or conflict between the executive branch and the legislative branch is nothing new. I mean, this is actually a common feature of American political life. And yet you have now Democrats and people in the media screaming, oh, this is not normal. That same refrain that they've been, hyperventilating since 2016. They're hyperventilating about something that is, in fact, fairly normal. I mean, last night I tweeted a couple examples of prior presidents asserting executive privilege or asserting executive privilege over materials that they did not want to release to Congress for whatever reason. So here's an example from 2016 when a judge rejected Obama's executive privilege claim over Fast and Furious records. Now, I know what the response to this would be. Fast and Furious was nowhere near the magnitude of importance as Trump, Russia, or Mueller. Okay, fine. Let's just grant that. But the point is that the mere act of the president or the executive asserting executive privilege over records so as to withhold them from Congress, which has duly issued a subpoena, is not itself a constitutional crisis. It happens frequently. And Obama was ruled against by the federal judge in this instance, and actually the federal judge is Amy Berman Jackson, who presided over Mueller, a few Mueller-related cases, such as one of the Manafort trials, which is just a mildly interesting coincidence, I guess. But then you have more examples like Solyndra in 2011. The White House counsel under Obama refused to comply with a subpoena as issued by a House panel regarding Solyndra, and the White House claimed that initiative by the GOP at the time was driven by partisan politics and not a legitimate effort to conduct oversight. George W. Bush invoked executive privilege and refused to turn over documents pertaining to a congressional investigation over his firing of U.S. attorneys. If you remember that scandal from 2006, 2007 timeframe. And Bush also actually prevented his underlings from testifying before Congress, like Harriet Myers, the former White House counsel who Bush actually nominated for the Supreme Court in 2005, but then withdrew the nomination and nominated Samuel Alito, who's actually from my town, my hometown. Anyway, I mean, I'll discuss that more at a later time, and other officials. And Bill Clinton invoked executive privilege in 1995 to resist a subpoena. This is, I'm quoting from here from the New York Times. In a brief file this evening, this is December 13th, 1995, the White House invoked executive privilege for the first time on Whitewater as it formally defended President Clinton's decision to defy Senate subpoenas. The brief filed with the Senate Whitewater Committee relied in part on legal arguments put forward in Watergate by President Richard M. Nixon and in the Iran-Contra affair by former members of the Reagan administration. So there's just a constant battle between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and actually every subsequent administration relies on the precedents and the legal arguments set forth by their predecessors to justify their refusal to comply with congressional investigations of various kinds. And that's exactly what Trump is doing right now. If you look at a letter issued by Bill Barr on May 8th, so today, Bill Barr wrote to the president and requested that he make a protective assertion of executive privilege with respect to the DOJ documents subpoenaed by Nadler, so relating to Mueller. And in that letter, Bill Barr shrewdly cites a 1996 opinion by none other than Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General for the entirety of Bill Clinton's 8 years in office, which was, lo and behold, Janet Reno laying out the legal arguments for why Bill Clinton should assert executive privilege regarding documents in the possession of the executive branch. So this idea this is not normal or it's an existential crisis or the government's about to collapse, which people are actually saying, it's ahistorical, it's lazy, it's needlessly incendiary, it's ginning up more hysteria. I mean, so that's why I'm just saying I'm singing the song never ends, because they just keep going with these mind-bogglingly hyperbolic interpretation of events that at bottom are actually somewhat banal and commonplace. But again, so why are the Democrats doing this? Why is Gerald Nadler doing this? Why is he now running around saying that we're in a constitutional crisis? Well, yes, I do drink Gatorade. It's Gatorade Zero, actually. I'm not doing a product plug, but so there's no sugar in this, and it gives you electrolytes, which I need. And I think it's just within the past year that Gatorade actually introduced this Gatorade Zero, which is actually really good. Not because I'm a huge fan of Gatorade, because I need the electrolytes. And anyway, who cares? Why did the Democrats take this tack with respect to Barr, where they made Bill Barr the locus of their consternation for the past week or 2 weeks? Because they could use Bill Barr as a vehicle to, like I said before, convert the House into the status of open warfare, because they can say that they're holding Bill Barr in contempt. The logical next step from that is to impeach Bill Barr, which I don't think they'll do, but they'll use it as an inroad to actually initiate impeachment proceedings against Trump. I mean, that's the end goal. And you got to remember, it doesn't even exactly matter if the Senate convicts Trump. Remember, during the Lewinsky stuff, nobody ever really thought that the Senate was going to convict Bill Clinton and remove him from office. But Republicans thought that the act of impeachment itself was desirable enough or had enough utility on its own to justify the course that they took during that time period. And I think Democrats are of a similar mindset right now. If you're in an impeachment circumstance, then there's so much political opportunity there, especially for the Democratic presidential candidates, to grandstand, to raise money, to be in conflict with Trump, which is great for them in terms of gaining momentum within the context of a Democratic presidential primary. So that's why in the past week you had Kamala Harris explicitly endorse the initiation of impeachment proceedings, which she did last Friday on the Rachel Maddow show. Previously, Kamala Harris had been a little more cagey and lawyerly about whether she backed that. Beto came out and explicitly endorsed it. Those are two of the top tier presidential candidates. That makes a big difference. And of course, Elizabeth Warren was, basically the first to do so. And yesterday, she got on the floor of the Senate and started reading into the congressional record parts of the Mueller report as if it was this secret document that she somehow came into possession of, and she was, taking this bold, heroic act to get it into the public record for the sake of the American people. And it's just like, did you know, Senator Warren, that anybody with an internet connection can actually access the report? It's not like it's been hidden or suppressed. But it was just a moment where she can get airtime, make appeals to the voters that she's seeking to court, and it suits her interest perfectly. She's actually gone up a little bit in the polls after she got ahead on this impeachment bandwagon. In one poll last week, she was actually ahead of Bernie Sanders in the national poll. So it seems to be working for her. So why wouldn't she continue with it? And for all I know, she believes it. So it's a perfect recipe for her. And then of course you have lower tier candidates like Julian Castro and Seth Moulton and maybe others who I've missed saying the same stuff. So it's creating a critical mass within the broader Democratic Party coalition that's just going to be inexorable. That's my theory anyway. I could be wrong, but I think we're moving to a point where they're obviously going to have to at least initiate impeachment proceedings. I'm not stating with certitude that they're going to actually impeach, but I think they're going to initiate impeachment proceedings. I don't know how they could not at this point. If Gerald Nadler is now saying that we're in a constitutional crisis, then that's really significant because he's the one who would initiate the impeachment proceedings. Just him, Gerald Nadler. So if that's his state of mind right now, or at least that's what he says publicly, then how do you resolve a constitutional crisis but to exercise this constitutionally prescribed mechanism of impeachment? I don't know. You tell me. It just seems like we're ineluctably leading to that. That's where all the pressure in the party is. Tom Steyer, this oligarch, from San Francisco. And I'm not denigrating San Francisco. I actually like San Francisco when I visit, but he has a Silicon Valley fortune or whatever, and he has this activist group called Need to Impeach, which you might have seen his TV ads or internet ads for. But what they're doing is they're activating these grassroots members to go to congressional offices in hometown districts. So I saw an example of them doing this with Representative Ted Deutsch. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from South Florida, where the people showed up to his office with bundles of postcards demanding that he support impeachment. And he's not a left-wing radical or anything. He's more a moderate, you could say. So he's not going to be necessarily instinctively inclined to get on board the impeachment train. But that stuff has an effect. I mean, you talk to congressional staff, the feedback that they get from their constituents does affect the behavior of the member. I mean, how could it not? That's the most direct form of trying to exert pressure on your elected representative. So you have all kinds of that stuff. I mean, every single day now, if you read the prestige media, and I'm using that with scare quotes, The Atlantic, the Daily Beast, etc. They're all writing and demanding impeachment. The New York Times every day has something like that. Washington Post. And members of Congress all read that stuff. I mean, they get it sent to them by their staff. They're aware, they're keenly aware of it. So it's not like they're operating in some different universe or something. I mean, they're immersed in the same media environment that we're immersed in. And actually was a big factor in why coverage of, of Trump Russia was so hysterical, and where there was such a feedback loop because the media and the politicians were both taking cues from each other, and they were kind of egging one another on down an even more frantic pathway, and that's just continuing. And here's another just crazy example of how nutty things have gotten. I almost can't believe that I'm going to say this, but it's absolutely true. You now have Democrats and people in prestige media. So Robert Reich, you might be aware of him. He had a column out today on this. There have been other columns. They're now raising the possibility that the House of Representatives could arrest and put into jail Bill Barr. So they're saying they could arrest the Attorney General of the United States. And how could they do that? Well, it's kind of complicated, but the Supreme Court has decided around a century ago that Congress has what's called inherent powers that are intrinsic to the institution. And one of those powers is effectively a law enforcement power where they could actually direct the sergeant at arms of the House. So the guy who oversees security for the House, and he's the guy who at the State of the Union, before the president comes out, he's standing there and saying, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States. It's that guy. They're saying they could direct that guy to go and arrest Bill Barr, place him in handcuffs, and put him into custody if Bill Barr doesn't comply with the subpoena. Now, that power hasn't been invoked since 1927. I actually just found a congressional research study on the nature of that power from 2017. I'm going to read it more thoroughly. Maybe I'm going to write something on it. But this is a power that hasn't been invoked since 1927. Sorry, I'm really thirsty in many respects. So that they're even contemplating this just shows you the frame of mind. I mean, I was walking out in the park here on Monday, and I torture myself when I do so because I listen to Morning Joe and stuff. And I was listening to Morning Joe on Monday, and Representative Jim Himes of Connecticut, Democrat, was on. And he's just kind of a generic Democrat. There's nothing notable about him at all, except for the fact that on this particular Morning Joe appearance, he was like, yeah, maybe we got to invoke this arcane power that we've never really even talked about for a century and arrest Bill Barr. It's just like, what? What did you just say? And Joe Scarborough and Mika are like, oh yeah, okay. It's just like, it doesn't even have any impact on them anymore because we're all so marinated in this frenzy that the incredible hyperbole and histrionics don't even have an impact on us anymore. It's crazy. I mean, that is a crazy suggestion. You're going to arrest the Attorney General of the United States? Talk about a constitutional crisis. Imagine if Bill Barr was sitting in some, I don't know, broom closet or something in the House of Representatives right now, guarded by Gerald Nadler or whoever, maybe Adam Schiff, movie standing guard. They would probably have different members rotate shifts and stand guard outside the room. So Eric Swalwell will take a shift, and whoever else. I don't know. Is that what they're saying? I don't know I don't know what to say anymore, because it's just gotten that wild. And I think there was another point that I wanted to raise, but anyway, that's enough for now. The point is, and I said this from the beginning of the Trump presidency, actually before he took office, and it was actually the tweet that I said this and was actually the header of my Patreon for a while, which you should subscribe to. Please do so. Whenever you think that things have reached peak craziness, they haven't. They're going to get more crazy. And that's just the nature of the country that we're living in now, whose political structures are corroded, where everything is fraying, at least at the national governmental level. And, just to be a little more abstract and theoretical about it, it's kind of the inevitable result of kind of almost a civilizational decline of a kind, the rescission of a hegemonic power, which the United States still is, but its influence is obviously eroding. And I think you're seeing these flare-ups of paranoia and just general Looney Tunes stuff for a reason that fundamentally stems back to that. I know that's kind of a deep subject. I'm gonna be writing I don't want to say what I'm going to be writing on that, but I'm writing something that's going to touch on that theme. That's going to try to encapsulate and synthesize all this stuff for a mass audience. So stay tuned for that. I won't have anything to say about that in specifics in the short term, but that'll be coming eventually. Anyway, that's what's going on now. This went a little long, but I'll see you later. I'll have a podcast out either tomorrow or Friday on a really important subject, Maria Butina. So that'll do it. Have a good night.